Did Richard Dawkins' metaphor of the selfish gene contribute to a crisis of meaning in 21st century philosophy as well as society at large? What is the selfish gene? Well, it's the idea that humans and all organisms are survival machines which serve the biological purpose of passing on genes. So the DNA is the center of the story of life, and organisms are kind of elaborate creations of the genome in order to fulfill that genetic purpose. Some people might find it kind of surprising that I'm talking about philosophy. Surely this is science, but Richard Dawkins himself admits at the beginning of the book that there are philosophical implications of the work. And in short, he's basically telling us what the purpose, at least on a biological level, is of life. And it's to serve as this vessel or vehicle, a survival machine, for the ultimate goal, which is propagating genetic material. Now, in the previous video that I posted, I explained why on a scientific level, I no longer believe that we should view life in this way. In many ways, we can see Richard Dawkins' work as a logical extension of a tradition that was started many hundred years before at the beginning of the scientific revolution. So in the 1500s, Nicholas Copernicus showed that rather than the Earth being at the center of the cosmos, instead the Earth revolves around the sun. Other people had suggested this many thousands of years before. However, now he was providing scientific evidence to back it up. So it could be seen as a humanity decentering moment, taking us from the center of cosmological proceedings, or also an illusion shattering event, the illusion of us being at the center of pretty much, well, everything. Humbling, if you will. Then, if we continue on in the scientific revolution, a next huge event is Charles Darwin and his book on the origin of species, the theory of evolution, and how species change through the laws of natural selection. And this could be seen as humanity decentering because it kind of went against the grain at the time. There was a strong Christian religious sentiment in the UK where Darwin's theory was being developed alongside Alfred Russel Wallace, the Welsh scientist who co-discovered the theory. And if you go by the Christian dogma at the time, we were made in God's own image. We had a privileged place in the universe. However, Darwin was saying the tree of life is a continuum and we are just one branch on that tree of life. And arguably this is an even more beautiful view. At the same time, it probably does dilute our cosmological importance, and in that way could be seen as another humanity decentering event. Furthermore, the illusion that's shattered at this time is the illusion of design in nature, which is the idea that the only way you can get the complexity that you see in life is by invoking an intelligent designer or creator God. It's not an idea I subscribe to at all with my own work. So there you have it. We could now view, through Richard Dawkins, we can go even further. Rather than viewing human, even as I sit here now, I can view humans as a secondary component in life. Because the biological purpose, we're being told, is the propagation of genetic material, and our genes construct us in order for them to get themselves passed on. So the survival machine is almost like a construct on the gene's behalf. Now, I don't agree with this anymore, and as I said, look into my previous video as to why I don't agree with the science anymore. This video, however, is about the impact of that idea on philosophy, and particularly nihilistic philosophy. Now, the thing about the selfish gene here is it came out about, 50 years ago this year it came out. This is the last edition that was published, the 40th anniversary edition. Absolutely beautiful book. And he has extensive forewords in these updated versions, which are very insightful. Now, in the foreword, he captured some of the existential angst that he was receiving from readers in response to reading The Selfish Gene. So in other words, there was a bit of an existential crisis, and I want to capture some of those just now. So one reader stated, "I wish I could unread it. On one level, I can share in the sense of wonder Dawkins so evidently sees in the workings out of such complex processes, but at the same time, I largely blame the selfish gene for a series of bouts of depression I suffered from for more than a decade." Separately, a foreign publisher disclosed that he could not sleep for 3 nights after reading it. So troubled was he by what he saw as its cold, bleak message. A teacher, so this is a third example, a teacher wrote to Dawkins to say that a pupil had come to him in tears after reading the same book because it had persuaded her that life was empty and purposeless. It's strong words, and it's a strong response to the book, a strong emotional reaction to the book, and credit to Richard Dawkins for including those in the foreword. So he offers 2 rebuffs to these reactions, as it were, and we'll talk about those in today's video. That's just a little snippet about the impact that the book had on some of its readers. I'm going to talk now about the impact it had on philosophy, in particular nihilistic forms of philosophy. Of course, these aren't mutually exclusive categories, but in rough idea, here's some background. So we can talk about nihilism as roughly being the idea that life is inherently meaningless. There is no grand narrative to the cosmos that we can reach out and find. Whenever we've looked for God, we've never found it. And so this has come out of the scientific revolution. This has come out from existentialist thinkers a little bit. People like Nietzsche, maybe Albert Camus and others, atheistic sort of philosophers. Secondly, we can go a bit further, which is pessimistic philosophy. This is the idea that human life has a net negative value. There's so much suffering that goes on. Some people would even say that the evolution of consciousness to the point we have self-awareness, we're aware of our own mortality, we're aware of the hardships of life. And we can go even further and we reach something called anti-natalist philosophy, which says that because of this net negative value of human life, that we should think very carefully about whether it's actually ethical to bring new human life into existence. I should probably just be clear, because I'm talking about atheism, I'm talking about nihilism. Where do I fall on the spectrum myself? I'm an atheist. I do not find any reason to believe in God personally. I've got no interest in attacking anyone for their own beliefs in God. Now, that's the God question. But what about the philosophical angle? Well, I suppose in some way I would call myself a nihilist, in the sense I don't believe there's a grand narrative to the universe or cosmological purpose. But I believe that meaning is something that we create ourselves. This is a common idea in existential philosophy and in absurdism as well. And so I take inspiration from some of those thinkers, but I also take inspiration from Buddhist thought and Stoic thought. We create our own meaning in lives. Thomas Ligotti is a horror fiction writer, but in 2010 he wrote a non-fiction book about philosophy. And in it, he kind of revived the work of the Norwegian philosopher Peter Wessel Zapffe. So there's been a lot of discussion online about Zapffe in recent years, but roughly we can think of consciousness evolving to the level in us today only makes us aware of the horrifying nature of reality. But in the book, Thomas Ligotti is quoting from another philosopher, Thomas Metzinger, and listen to this quote and see if you recognize any of this language. "The cat is out the bag. We are gene-copying bio-robots living out here on a lonely planet in a cold and empty physical universe. I get the message, and you had better believe I will adjust my behaviour to it. We are paradoxical beings who know the score but tamp down their consciousness to keep from knowing it too well. And so there's that idea that we need delusion in order to cope with the suffering in human life. David Benatar is probably the most high-profile example of an anti-natalist in the 21st century. And in his book, he quoted the philosopher Stephen Law and Stephen Law's interpretation of the selfish gene and wrote the following. Stephen Law says that every living organism has a purpose, namely to reproduce and pass on its genetic material to the next generation. He says that we each exist for a purpose supplied by nature, whether or not there is a God. If that were our ultimate purpose, it would not be sufficiently ultimate to count as a cosmic purpose. Instead, it would be distinctly terrestrial. Nor would this purpose be inspiring enough to console us. When people wonder whether their lives have meaning, they are not likely to be reassured by the observation that they are merely a mechanism of replicating genetic material. Indeed, that is the very kind of thought that drives people to wonder what life is all about. To think that humans would find genetic replication a satisfactory cosmic purpose is as absurd as the quip that a chicken is an egg's way of making another egg. What was Richard Dawkins' response to some of these concerns? Well, he says that if something is true, no amount of wishful thinking can undo it. And he gave a second rebuff, which I'll come to later on. I agree. It doesn't matter how you feel about something. That doesn't impact on whether it is true. So my argument against the selfish gene isn't because of how it makes me feel. It was something I lived with for many years and I just believed it to be true. But eventually I did abandon it on scientific grounds. I've written quite a few things on it, but basically the simple fact for me is it's an information-based theory of life. It omits too much about energetics. It overlooks the organism, which he demotes to this role of survival machine. And for me, none of that is appropriate for a genuine theory about what biological organisms are. He arrives at that by overlooking important information. And he did it in spectacular fashion. It's probably the most compelling popular science book that's ever been written. This is the thing I would have liked Dawkins to explore more in the existential space, is that when we talk about, pessimistic philosophers will talk about living in a vast, uncaring universe. But if we're looking for meaningful structures in the universe, then there is nothing more meaningful than life itself. If anything, I believe that meaning is something that emerges out of life, out of consciousness. Yes, the universe is a vast, empty, dark place. But the earth and life on earth is a precious island of meaning, a vibrant island of meaning amidst that darkness. So when we're looking for meaning in life, I think it's probably the absolute worst place to look would be into the vacuum of space. If we're looking at meaning in life, we can look here at meaning-making objects like humans and other life forms. The fact that you are part of an unbroken chain of existence that goes back 4 billion years, a third the age of the entire universe, you're arguably the most meaningful thing that we know of that can exist. Something that can display purpose and intention, can think forward, can think about itself. Yes, that can sometimes be terrifying. And ultimately we have to accept the challenge to embrace the good and the bad of life. And I think Buddhism and Stoic philosophy offers some comfort in terms of how we deal with suffering. And of course Camus, with his idea of the myth of Sisyphus, which was about how to embrace the suffering which is inevitable in human life. When we accept that meaning is something that we can create, it gives us a huge responsibility because we can see actions, relationships, jobs, types of work, human pursuits as being either meaning enhancing or meaning detracting activities. And this is empowering. And as I said, some people find it terrifying as well. Let me know in the comments where you stand on that. I said before that Richard Dawkins offers like a second rebuff to the existential concerns, and this is it. He says, presumably there is indeed no purpose in the ultimate fate of the cosmos, but do any of us really tie our life's hopes to the ultimate fate of the cosmos anyway? So again, I think what happened with the selfish gene was that by continuing this sort of impersonal description of nature and of life in the selfish gene, Richard Dawkins probably thought that was pretty safe territory for a scientist, which we can understand why. However, you can actually take that too far the other way and start to impose properties on reality and on life that it doesn't have. So there's more to it than just being impersonal and taking that step back. I think we do tie our life's hopes to the universe. Physically, we are the universe. The atoms that make us up were forged in stars, and we are every bit a part of the universe as anything else. We are a particularly complex part of the universe, arguably the most complex thing we know of that can exist. And life displays unbelievable properties that go way beyond any machine that we've made up until now. So, because we're made of the same stuff as the cosmos, atoms, and our molecules are arguably more complex than things you would find in non-living structures. So it's the complexity that probably, separates us from other things if we are going to see it that way. But we are still at the mercy of physical laws. The second law of thermodynamics, that things which are ordered and complex, like human things, always tend to disorder. And I'm using shorthand simplifications here. But in other words, because we are the cosmos, because all things that are ordered become disordered over time, our eventual decay is inevitable. So the transience of human life is, a fundamental law of the universe. So I believe that mortality is probably the original confrontation with existential issues. And so yes, we do tie our life's fates to the cosmos. If you're interested in science and the philosophical implications of science, then please check out these articles on Substack, where you'll find a lot more information than discussed in the current video. So the article is called The Selfish Gene and the Problem with Machine Metaphors in Biology, and I'll give some links in the video description below.